Thank you, Tim, for that. You're now going to moderate this panel. It's called Supercharge Your Enterprise with Security, Privacy, Best Practices for Data Fabric and Generative AI. And it says you can achieve success and have fun doing it. So, Tim, you and your team are going to deliver here. Let's bring up Kelly Manis, who you already met, Vice President of BizDev at Constant Data Integration. Kamal Distell is VP Data Analytics Platforms and Data Science at Toyota. And Chip Crane is America's Security Technical Leader at IBM. And you already met Sol Rashidi, who's here as former CDAO of Estée Lauder, Merck, Sony Music, and Royal Caribbean.
All right. All right, well, thank you everyone for joining, and we've got a terrific panel here today. And I think I want to, kind of tee off some of the discussion we just had, which is, I've made the trip from CDAO and data foundation and data integration and creating, all these powerful tools. We created the Infosphere brand, and then we've migrated up the stack. And what you have is many enterprises that have every tool, every magic tool there is out there, right? And despite buying every magic tool on the planet, they still have these intractable data problems. And now enters advanced analytics, enters generative AI, as well as cognitive functions that we're trying to drive within this. And when you get into this, and when you get into the analytics and into the mathematics and what you're trying to produce with the models, you immediately end up in a data shoveling exercise. And I think someone, the former speaker, just mentioned that, where it's the data that is the critical aspect of this. And so now I've migrated back down to how do you create a data foundation that's right for generative AI, that can be used as a core foundation for what you're building. And it's different than what we were doing before. It's not traditional governance, it's automated governance. It's not batch-oriented ETL, it's real-time data flow processes, and it incorporates what the content of the data is so that you're actually producing data quality processes, data masking processes, data privacy, and you're integrating data security with it. And so the first question I want to ask the panel is, how are you creating, in your experience, this data foundation that you can use effectively for analytics and generative AI? Let's start with
Kamal. Yeah. So I'm Kamal Distell. I lead the data analytics and decision intelligence practice at Toyota and Lexus. Yes, I drove here in my Toyota today. So really, we are turning things completely upside down in terms of sort of how we thought about data. In our practice, there's a dichotomy, right? So how do you build the future in terms of the infrastructure and the information and data coming through our pipelines? But then most importantly, how do you change hearts and minds, right? Because the senior leaders are very excited about it, but at the same time, when you read things in the media, right, there is a little bit of discomfort now, right, to say, wait, how do I think about this? So a few things what we're doing, and certainly I'm sure the panelists here will add a lot more. Our pipelines look very different, right? So how do we actually think about distributed data? How do we think about data that's being generated, right? Because generative AI, guess what, generates more data and information, right? So how we're actually thinking through our infrastructure, our cloud infrastructure, and partnering with our partners to say, how am I pulling this information in? What can you tell me? What phase gates can I put in here that are automated, that tell me about bias, that tell me about all the rest of the deterrence, right? Where cybersecurity is going to come and say, hey, how did you think about this and how did you think about that? So our pipelines are not only becoming very automated, but also how the data is traversing through. We've put in some gates in between to be able to capture and catch all of those little friction points, right? And then at the end, right, as we're consuming a lot of this data into different models, by the way, everything behind the firewall, make sure all of that, I don't need to say that to you all, right? But we are doing very controlled experiments. And those controlled experiments, what it does is allows people to also feel comfortable with what it is that we're producing. So we're doing not just responsible AI, but responsible and actionable AI. So our leaders are part of the discussion. They're sitting on the forums. They're seeing the outcomes. And we're raising sort of looking under the covers, right, to say.
So is that how you're getting trust into the outcome? Is that the?
I think that's the goal. But
Okay.
I think right now with all the sort of exposure in the media, right. They're asking great questions. So if you want to be successful, right, you've got to get through those controlled experiments, have to have sort of the infrastructure that's a lot more automated but controlled, and then change hearts and minds. So that's what we're doing.
Right. So the same question for you. What are your thoughts? You've had a lot of diverse experience here across the number of companies.
Drink before
so
I
you've
answer
probably seen it all, right?
There's a lot of tenets to that. I would say the biggest foundational element is try to dispose of the notion that all data needs to be centralized as part of the foundational fabric. For any of you guys who started the process, remember it was no longer about marts and warehouses, and it became about the data lake.
Yep.
Centralize all data, and that's one of the skinned knees in 2015-16. We created one of the first, if you will, like at that scale. And we realized that it was, a lake without cataloging and lineage that's what inevitably leads to the ocean swamp thing that everyone's talking about. But cataloging is not sexy. No one wants to do that. But the time to market for centralizing all the data is extremely time consuming, very laborious. You have to set up these massive data factories. After a while, the business gets impatient and says, where's the business value when you're still migrating data? And I swore I would never do that again. So to answer your question of how do you build a foundational data ecosystem to support these generative AI models, I think first, beating the misnomer of not all data needs to be centralized and not all data is equal. So we can leverage data within existing databases and warehouses. We can use techniques like virtualization. Whatever's in the lake is fine. But then the second is we create what I call zoning optionality.
Yeah.
So whether it's a data science team and they're doing data science work as a bespoke, they want access to raw data. If it's your low code and no code team, they want access to the semantic layer. So you got to prepare the different zones for the different audiences. You guys also know that. I think the biggest kicker at this point in time, though, is when it comes to generative AI-based use cases, you've got to pick the use case where your data has the highest hygiene and integrity. You guys also know that, but then creating what I call a separate zoning mechanism for that data in and of itself. The challenge being is when you're fundamentally pushing data into LLMs, the first conversation that folks tend to have with compliance and risk is the what-if scenarios. What if there is a breach? What if they're training their parameters based on our data set? What if there's a data leakage, which just happened with OpenAI?
Right.
So you have to prepare for the what if scenarios. And so I think quarantining and zoning off your data so that it's a very small subset that goes in.
Yeah.
And then I think there's all sorts of capabilities around masking, which have now been created. So in the last panel, we were talking about what are we doing next. Now I'm actually partnering with companies that have solutions to these things that we're living with or we had to build bespoke.
Right.
Or shortcutting those conversations with compliance and risk from 7 months to 2 months. And helping them actually develop their product so that it can be applied towards enterprise applications. And one of them is single directional. So it's not encryption, it's not bidirectional, but single directional data masking. So the LLM can be trained on the data, but the LLM can't actually see your data. So even if something is leaked, it'll be leaked in alphanumeric characters, which is awesome. So I think there's so many things that go into that, but just the basics is it doesn't need to be centralized.
And I think
zone your data.
And I think you're making some really critical points here. One is zones and decentralized, right? That distributed topology map. This is a path to success. I'm very convinced of this. And because it gives you the power to zone, map, and put these things
And your graph around the knowledge catalog,
Right.
For every CDO and CIO, we know cataloging always gets descoped. We always somehow, our budget gets gobbled up by other things. It is probably the most underrated yet critical components, because whether if your initiative is data democratization or data observability or data access, you cannot democratize the information unless you fundamentally catalog what's available, where it's available, and how it's been transformed. So for me, long gone are the days of building these data factory models of lift and shift, lift and shift,
Yep.
lift and shift. It's keep the data where it is, find capabilities that brings it together, and then catalog the darn thing.
Yeah, and I think getting to trusted information, and you're going to hear this word trust a lot. And many of the CDOs that I've worked with, this is the struggle that they're under, because everyone wants to, okay, let's put ChatGPT and just let it loose in our enterprise, and what happens? I mean, how many people have done that and experienced the problems thereof? Anybody using ChatGPT? Because most of the enterprises I'm working with, including like Bank New York Mellon, including Northwest Mutual, all these different companies, they've passed laws now, including IBM, that you shall not use ChatGPT in the public forum. And so this is all about creating a private environment, a private set of data, a private set of corpuses. And now, how do we get to trusted information? This is the state of the art now of how are we connecting into those neural networks, into those trusted end uses of generative AI and other things. How do we actually connect those dots, right? And if you're in that level, we have a lot of experience in the field, but this is where the state of the art is. And Chip, I want to go to you next, because you are one of our deepest security experts in cybersecurity. And 5 years ago, we would never talk to each other because security was over there, data was over here.
It's true.
But we're kind of being forced together, where you and I met actually at a customer site. Yep. Doing this, right, where we're bringing together data privacy, security, all this stuff we're talking about. Give us your thoughts on where we're going and where the industry is.
How much time do we have, Tim? Because I can talk about this for days. So all the things that Sol has said is very important. You've got to be able to compartmentalize that data. You also, in my humble opinion, need to leave that in place. I think you're exactly right on that. Because that's going to allow you to put the right model of security on top of that where it is. The more you move the data, the more chance you have of there being problems, and the problems you really don't want to have. Second thing is, you got to ask yourself, does everyone really need that data? Maybe I need to be able to train the AI on that, but do I really need anyone else to have that data other than who the data steward, data owner is, right? So you got to be able to put that, all the trust factors, and this is going to get larger and larger. There are things that haven't been made public yet that you guys are going to find out in the next few weeks that are going to frankly snowball the problems that we've seen in the press lately, right? So you realize that your customers are going to not just want this, not just expect this, but demand this. And Lord forbid if there ever becomes the ability to hold us accountable for what that AI is going to do. So you have to compartmentalize that. You've got to be able to categorize that, but you also have to make sure that you can explain why the data is where it is, why the data was moved, why the AI engine saw that as a valuable piece of information, right? So you're going to have to explain that so it's beyond just the lineage, it's beyond the lineage and the reasoning behind how the data showed up on whatever end user screen it had, right? Yeah. And it's terrifying, to be candid. Most of the CISOs, most of the CDOs that I'm talking to, most of the CEOs are bringing us in now as security, right? Because we're doing so much with Gen AI, what are we going to do with that? But honestly, and Tim, I told you I could talk all day on this, so I'll cut off after this.
I'll order drinks for you.
Yeah. That's good. So the reality is, it's also the fact that how do we supply chain, if you will, or software supply chain, the models that you guys are grabbing out of GitHub, right? I know you need those. I know the cost is the cost savings and cost avoidance is there, but you have to understand the risk that's involved in that. And again, I'm not anti any of these things. I'm just you need to be risk aware, right? You need to be able to make the right decisions on that. And frankly, when we use ChatGPT or any cloud service, understand that whatever you put into that prompt is now their information, like it or not. So I've had a CISO come back to me with this representation to the board, and it had this beautiful opening letter. And I was like, that's awesome. And had very detailed information. He goes, yeah, you should be proud of me. I used ChatGPT to help me write that. And I'm just like, oh my gosh.
And not to add more mess to it. Just like plumbing and electrical work, this is an area you got to bring in the expert. Don't try and solve for it yourself, because it gets further bifurcated when you're closed source versus open source, and then buy versus build. They do have varying degrees of security needs. And again, I know databases, but I'm not a database administrator. And I'm sure we can watch a YouTube video and do our own wiring, but at the cost of, the whole house going on fire. This is one area where I want the guy with the ear hairs who looks like he's 82 years old, who
That's
lives
Chip
in
all
his
the way.
cubicle,
I was going to say, what are you saying about me now?
who's been doing this since the 80s and the 90s, and not necessarily social or an extroverted. I want that guy telling me exactly what I need to do and across all these layers. Because this isn't something you learn in the past 2 years or 3 years. You need those scraped knees to understand how to protect yourself, because there's so many different layers to keep track of.
Bring the leaders along though, right? Because at the end of the day, you can have the best pipelines and the best infrastructure, but if they don't understand or feel comfortable with what it is that you're doing and look underneath the covers, right, with you, they will not go through the journey, right? And the journey is long.
You've got great leaders, and my leaders
Exactly.
had no interest in learning.
I mean,
We're forcing them to learn.
it's more important now than ever, right? We were
Yeah.
focused before on data cleansing, data extraction, data deduplication. Now it's really about trusted data, because with Gen AI, people are taking that data and using it to make decisions with data that we don't know that it's trusted or correct. So I kind of liken it to the creation of fire. I mean, this is such an evolving technology, similar to the way that fire was invented and how important that was to us. If we don't get this right with the people in this room, we could all explode or get
We're all
burned.
going to be on fire.
We're all going to, seriously, it's important that the data is trusted and accurate for the decision makers today.
And again, I think security is key, and Chip is one of our highly sought after people. So you got a golden jewel here. I encourage you to network with him and talk with him. And if you give him enough beers, he'll actually tell you all the secrets about cyber attacks and cyber security, because he's the first to know what's going on. And he'll call me. But Chip, what is zero trust? What does that mean?
So I'd imagine most of you had some exposure to zero trust. So I'm going to give you the really quick version of this. Net, it's really just a different approach than what we've done in the past. There used to be this idea that once you got into the network, you were trusted, you were free to roam, good to go. The best analogy I've had, and I really give this so that you guys can give this to other people, not that you need it. So 10 years ago, if you were going to come to my house and house sit while I was on vacation, right? What would I do? I would give you a key to the front door. You would open the front door. You would walk in. Well, that gave you access to the guest bedroom, the guest bathroom, the kitchen, the den, the wine cellar. I don't really have a wine cellar. I'm not at your level. But it would give you access to everything, right? Well, that's not really what I really wanted, but I would have to do that, right? Well, now today with zero trust, I give you a key to the front door, and I give you a key to the guest bedroom, because that has a separate lock on it. And I'll even give you a key to the guest bathroom, because that's probably needed. And if you're not my brother-in-law's, I'll give you a key to the guest pantry. But that's just me, right? And so each door now has a lock on it, so I can very finely control exactly what doors you're allowed to walk into. And then you have to understand that each door is going to automatically close, and you're going to have to reopen it every time you walk through that door. Furthermore, I also tell you, look, if you run into someone in the hallway, right? There's just by chance, you're walking down the hall and someone else is in there. Don't trust them just because they also had a key to the front door, right? You can trust them a little bit more than the guy running through the neighborhood, but you can't trust them just because they're inside. Yes, they have access to that room, but you don't share your keys or access with anything in it, right? That's the analogy I typically use with the board meetings to try to get them to grasp very quickly what we're trying to do with zero trust. It's just a model of, you don't have free access just because you're inside. You have the least amount of access that I can give you for you to be able to function, right? And then it's going to have continuously verification on each and every door. And then just because someone else is in the network, it's just a data point, but it may make your trust score go up a bit, but that's all it's going to mean.
So, Tim, not to hijack, on that note though, part of the role of CAO and the CDO is user experience, ease of
100%.
use. With all due respect, I have a set of keys and I constantly don't know where I put them. So if I now have to have 8 keys to manage going into a house, It's
You gotta
just
have a
not
big
happening.
keychain.
I'm sleeping in the car. I do think there does, at some point, there needs to be that healthy conversation and healthy tension to be able to have a balance. So if I have a data scientist that needs access to sensitive data or confidential data, but they have authorization and they have authentication, it's not another 3 weeks approval rights to be able to go in and access that data set, ingest it into a separate environment. And heaven forbid if you're a data analyst and don't have access to a lot of data and everything's been segmented. For those of us who are on the hook of providing insights on the go, near real time, just to go through a 4 to 6 week jumping through hoops to get access to the data is really unrealistic.
Okay.
So there does need to be a little bit of a balance. And I remember having this, it wasn't it was a debate with him. It's usually a conversation with someone else. But there was this guy at Sony Music, and they were, you guys remember, Sony Music was hacked many, many years ago. And the analogy similar, and I love your house analogy, is that, you know, the car had 4 wheels, and the car was moving. We got hacked. And what had happened is now that we wanted to change a spare tire, those bolts were tightened so tight that even if I had a flat tire, I couldn't even change it with the spare that I had in the trunk. And I said the balance is we've got to protect the tire and everything we have, but we need to exchange and have the flexibility of being able to change the flat tire with the spare tire without calling 6 people, waiting for the tow truck. I should be able to do it on my own.
Are you
So
saying
what's the
the
balance?
security guy slows things down? You can't get them done?
It took
I'm trying to start an
24
argument,
minutes
right?
for us to have to separate for a moment.
I love the philosophy, I love the
Totally
theory,
agree.
but for those of us that are on the hook to develop capabilities and business value, that's not the best experience for our teams.
100% agree, and I think this is exactly where we've got to pivot as a security team, not you guys. We have to pivot and bring you practical solutions that are going to provide business value, right? My other thing to the board is you don't insure your $500 kid's college car for $1 million, right? You don't pay $500 a month for insurance on a $500 car. Don't let us as a security team talk you into spending $1 billion to go save $1 million. It doesn't make sense. Furthermore, we've got to allow new ways of thinking, and the beauty is the technology is catching up. So we no longer have to say, look, you bring your analyst in or out, and we've got this 6-week approval process. We now can say, look, you classify them as a AI architect or whatever you want to do. You tell us as a security team that all AI architects should have these pieces of roles, right? So we match that to the role. Furthermore, the technology is advanced. You can say, look, we've classified these 4 levels of data. This data is lunchroom menu or gym schedule, easy peasy. Okay, great. They automatically get it. It's frictionless. They don't even know security existed. Next layer up, all the way till you get to the point where, hey, we've got to be super careful about this. We know that, so now what we're going to do is we're going to take other things into context. Hey, is that the laptop that they're always on? Yes. Great. All right. Is that the phone that they normally use? Yes. Are those 2 in proximity? Yes. Are they in a geolocation that we would expect them to be in? No, they're in Russia. Nope. Stop right there, right?
That's right.
Oh, wait, they are in the geolocation, right? Okay, perfect. Great. They're on Northeastern campus. but
So you're fundamentally saying you're going to be the secret security guy.
Well, that's our goal.
It's not going to get in the way.
Our goal
that right?
is for you to
Okay.
not know who we are. My running joke is we're trying to be ninjas, right? So, but the point of that is that we're trying to use the technology more and more to make it as less frictionful.
Yeah.
There is a fusion between the 2 spaces, because for the CDAOs and CAOs out there, like, I had 0 interest in learning cloud ops and identity access management.
Yeah.
But I had to become educated because I needed to have a healthy discussion with the CIO and the head of compliance, because I'm like, it's taking too long. This can't be the way we continue to move forward. I don't want to hear no, I want to understand how.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I couldn't ask them to solve the problems because they were just coming to the table with just knows we can't do this, the risk exposure is too high. And so we kind of have to fuse the 2 roles together. You have to learn cloud ops. You have to understand around authorization, authentication,
and I think that's what Chip and I
role-based access. Because if you
Yeah.
don't, you can't come to the table to come
Yeah.
together with that balance of a solution.
And I think that's what Chip and I have been finding and with these clients we've been dealing
Yeah.
with, because it's a convergence of security, data privacy, data
Yeah.
governance. They're coming together. Now, Kamal, we're talking about cars, right? And you've got all sorts of things you're dealing with at Toyota, telematics, everything else. How are you managing this security privacy environment?
Great question.
I mean, I don't want
No.
my Toyota shutting down here in the middle of the road.
It will not. So, and if it does, you can call me. I will.
Okay, we'll call
I'll
you personally.
personally
Okay,
change your tire.
I got your number on speed dial. Yeah.
No, I love what you said, and I come from a cybersecurity background as well. So as I started, right, I had to speak the language, and the story is, I was building pipelines for many, many years, as Saul said. And then all of a sudden it's like, what's SecDevOps, right? It's a real thing. So the good part is that I learned cybersecurity, some along the way, some in many, many other ways, right? To be able to have that conversation. There is a thing called blast radius, right? There is a thing called how do you automate a lot of the capabilities that we're just talking about here to be able to control the data that you need to control. Not all data, as we just said, right, needs to be controlled with that same level of rigor. But the key part is there is a lot of automation. So if you kind of take a step back, right, and say, how do I want this persona, and what does this persona's experience need to be to get to this piece of information that sits over here, right? And so we've been doing a lot more persona mapping and then layering on all the capabilities that we need with automation, right? There's a thing called ATAP, right? Every 8 hours, right? Re-engage. There is a thing called obfuscation, right? How do you obfuscate the data appropriately with all the layers of protection? And that is built with automation. So gone are the days, right, when you had to manually sequence all of these things, right? You now have the ability and the power. And again, there are recipes built. Have an offline chat. We won't have enough time here to be able to say, how do I sequence all of that to give our CISO the comfort that we know and we have the observability built in terms of who, what, when, where, why, and then re-engage, right? Whatever threshold they want. Is it 4 hours? Is it 8 hours? For a lot of our confidential and highly confidential data, right, we actually take away the access in a heartbeat. And then we actually force the user in some ways to go and re-engage. That's not because we want to make their life miserable. It's to make sure that there are enough protections and there's enough breadcrumbs built along the way so that you can say, yeah, got it. But you have to actually be able to then prove, right, and say, we're not ruining your world. Look, this is what the MLOps pipeline looks like. As you re-engage, your model connectivity does not just go away, right? So there are recipes that you can build in order to make that experience a lot more seamless, but happy to chat offline.
Yeah, and I think your point about automation is huge. We could spend a whole entire panel discussing it, but to me, automation is the critical aspect. We can no longer be doing manual governance, manual model management, manual production. We've got to be able to have this automated. I talked a little bit about the data steward robot, that we're now deploying everywhere, so that you're able to manage rules and policies and have a rules and policy driven environment. And it can do a couple of things for you if you do that. One is lower the bar on the skill sets is one, because as you all know, it's very hard to find top skilled data stewards, top skilled knowledge. I mean, just the knowledge in this room, there's nothing else like this. On the planet, and like Dave was talking about. I mean, people are trying to recruit all of you to drive their business. So Kelly, the question I want to ask you is, how do we implement successful projects? I mean, you're out in the field, you're driving a lot. I've seen you drive a lot of success over the years in staffing skills and also starting to incorporate automation in getting to better outcomes. So how would you,
so absolutely,
talk about that a little bit?
Automation is absolutely key because it takes some of those rote responsibilities away, and the individuals and the resources working on the implementation can focus on solving the client's problems. What is the use case? How do we architect the proper solution with the technology that they have to ensure that that solution is going to meet their needs? Growing the use cases to enable the decision makers to have more robust and sound data to make decisions with. Again, it's using a sound methodology. And from my perspective, as a person who has owned delivery excellence at IBM for 25 years and now owning it at CDI, it's really about getting the right resources with the skills to do the job. I mean, it's going to make your implementation either pleasurable or painful. So you want to have the right skills in the right role, performing what they need to do, and really working collectively as a team to make that implementation successful. I have managed many implementations where the team, if they weren't gelling, they weren't working together, they weren't meeting with the executive sponsorship and understanding that they're making the needs, it wasn't going to be successful. So right out of the gate, you have to establish the methodology, the rules of engagement, the executive sponsorship, the decision makers, and keeping them abreast and communicating to them on a regular basis. At the end of the implementation, I think it's really important to reward the team and recognize the success that they've had and have an amazing go-live party. And at the end of it, you need to leave that client with good documentation and trained individuals that can carry on so that you can shut the lights off when you leave as a consultant and that company remains whole to continue on with the implementation. One other piece I would add is that after you've done that, you could interview just 5 users and you will find 80% of your problems. And then you got to go about remediating those problems with those same excellent skilled resources that have the technology and the soft skills. They're just as important.
And I want to go to those success parties or whatever you
Yes,
say. Yeah,
yes,
I want to
yes.
invite to those.
Absolutely.
And I encourage everyone that Kelly's going to be at the CDI table over here. You know, she is a critical success factor. I've seen it for the last 20 years. Working with her. I have one last question for the panel, and then we're going to open it up for all of you to ask questions. And you know, this is probably the most fundamental question I'm struggling with right now, and that we're driving to get answers on. And that is, you know, we've all got experience in traditional data governance. We've all got experience in now AI governance and model management and how we actually put models into production. And now we're starting to see, you know, a lot of uptake of generative AI. How do we plug those three things together? I mean, you can't put data lineage through a generative AI environment. You know, it doesn't work. So how do we get, you know, determinism or trust and success in that? What is the magic sauce to do that? That's what I'm looking for right now, and I'm hoping somebody in this panel is going to tell me. So.
I'll share a story. I don't know the answer what the magic sauce is, but
Well,
I do know that
I
there's
want an answer. Come on.
higher propensity of accomplishing that goal within certain cultures versus others. I think I'd mentioned in the last panel of get to know if they have a pension, what's the average tenureship of the individual. And that wasn't like just a funny little remark. It legitimately matters. Like, how many of you guys own enterprise data management teams and you have an MDM team embedded in them? Maybe a dozen or so. Like, just to kind of story tell a little bit. Automation, security layers, those things are no-brainers for us. They're table stakes. But when you have the role of a CDO or a CAO, everything's about energy management. A lot of things are burning. Which fire are you going to put out first? And
The fire analogy.
you know, there's always the conversation of, well, we don't have enough capacity, we need to be able to do more, we support enterprise data management, we need to cover more data sets, we need to hire people. And my feedback always is, 3 women can't have a baby in 3 months. Sometimes adding headcount doesn't solve the problem. It actually makes it more complicated. So how do we become smarter about what we do? And I remember in my last organization, I had a team of about 94 individuals who supported enterprise data management. I'm like, what does that even mean within our organization? What exactly do you guys manage? And I swear for the life of me, I could not get answers out of my leaders. And I'm like, something doesn't smell right. So then I started having meetings with the leaders and then their plus ones.
Yeah.
I still couldn't get the answers from the senior directors and my VPs. I'm like, something doesn't smell right. I just dug. And then I said, hey, I'm doing a tour of all of our teams. I'm going to do a day in the life, because I couldn't crack the nut. They just weren't transparent with me. And a day in life means I get to shadow and sit with you, so I get to learn your job and appreciate what you do, so I have context so I can be a better leader. That was 90% true. 10% of it was, I want to know what the hell this team is doing, because no one's being transparent about it with me.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, I found out that my team of 94, they were a massive factory of copying and pasting across across 7 different applications. And that's how they were managing MDM governance. Businesses would send an email,
Okay.
they'd go find the SKU number in this, they'd copy paste here, they'd find out if it was active, where it was. They wouldn't actually fix the information at the source. They would explain why the issue was and how to redo it in a way to work around the systematic programming that was in place. And I was like, I've just got
But
a big
they had a
copy and
tracking
pasting.
process through this, right? They had a lineage.
Sort of, but that was
to this.
all Excel and email and Word
Oh, okay.
document. That's not
Okay.
really tracking. So
Okay.
in my mind, I'm like, oh, we're going to automate. My biggest hurdle wasn't the automation technology.
Yeah.
It wasn't the strategy. It wasn't the security layers. It was their fear that their jobs were now being automated because this is what they'd been doing for 17
Yeah.
years.
Yeah.
It took me 14 months. And it was a no-brainer ROI.
Yeah.
Because of just the mindset shift that
Yeah.
I needed to make it. I'm like, I'm not replacing your jobs. I'm just going to allocate you to do more work that requires
Right, to
critical
do more
thinking,
critical work,
yeah.
not
Yes.
copying and pasting. We're actually going to try and govern at scale, not at team capacity. And these things just weren't registering. All this is to say, to kind of go back to how do we bring it together? I actually think certain legacy-based cultures, it's a point of diminishing returns, and you've just got to spot it. Is that
So
where
it's
you're
going to it's going to change the culture in the organization.
you won't be able
right?
to if you've got an organization that's
Stuck in
pension-driven,
Yeah.
20 years, because it's about job security and
Yeah.
protection for them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Unless you have the energy to spend 14 to 16 months, and I didn't know it was going to take this long. I'd say choose other battles and choose other areas
Yeah.
to win.
Yeah.
But if you've got an organization that's like, we've got to figure this out, and we're really aligning everything behind
Yeah.
it, so the alignment discussions and the people discussions are 3 months and not 14, it's a different ball of wax.
Yeah,
That's where the
great.
real work
Yeah.
starts.
Culture
great,
is-
great comment. So,
Yeah.
so Chip, are you going to answer my question? How do I plug this into generative AI?
Sorry.
The answer to that is no, Tim. I'm going to tell you no. I'm not going to answer that question. I do want to hit on the fact that I do think culture is very important in every aspect of what the organization does. Security, advancement, AI, just about everything you do. You have to ask yourself, what's the culture of the organization I'm in? What's the culture of the team I'm in? Frankly, what's the culture of the mindset that I'm in right now, right?
Yeah.
But to Tim's point, or to try to address that, I'm not going to help you solve it. I'm going to make it more complicated because I'm in security. That's what we do. I will tell you that you can build an awesome piece of AI software, technology, data, et cetera,
Yeah.
et cetera. And you can wow the world with it. But if you goof up this much on your security and you get breached and that trust goes away in nanoseconds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How do you
One-
get? Then you
one
can't get
headline.
it back. Right.
Right,
Once
exactly.
it's
I was
gone.
gonna
Yeah.
say-
The faucet turns off.
One
Yeah.
one headline will ruin you for
Yeah.
24, 48 months. We've unfortunately in security got problems in the fact that companies have been breached in the past, and their CISOs look at me and go, Chip, our stock price is right back where it was just 12 months ago. Yes, but where could it have been, right? And that's the part that I think they miss sometimes. I'll also say this, I've got a few companies that are trying to save on budget that are deeply securing their AI models and what they're working on right now, and basically ignoring all the previous parts of the organization. Guess where the hackers are looking? At all that, just to be able to get access to everything else. It's not a lake house, as I say, it's a submarine. You can't afford to leave the window just a little bit open. You're on a submarine. Nothing can be open, whether you like that or whether you don't. So
Good
I hope that helped, Tim. I
It
say that tongue in
did.
cheek,
It
but,
did.
yeah.
And we have a lot of discussions, Chip and
Yeah,
I,
we
about
do.
this.
Yeah, we
And
do.
he still hasn't answered my question, right? But that's okay.
He's
But-
in security.
You're
yeah.
over-
You'll never get an answer.
You're
Come
over
on,
two.
can you enlighten us? on how
Bring
to
us
do
home.
this?
We
I'll
obviously
bring you
failed.
home.
You're
Right?
right.
I think I'll make a couple of connectivity items here, right? So number one, that's the house of no, and you have to figure out how you turn the
Exactly.
house of
House
no
of
to a
how.
house of yes. Yeah.
Yep.
I think I don't have the magical answer, just like the panel said here, right? But I think for us, it's transparency, right? So I just sat with my team last week for the entire week, right? Going through process by process, as Saul said, right? Like, let's walk through, how do we do this? And just in that conversation, linking it back to, what you were saying, Kelly, is the people will be able to also, alongside technology and alongside processes, be able to help you spot some of these things, right? So you as a leader certainly have to enable a lot of those things to happen, to be able to say, wait a second, what we're doing doesn't actually make sense, right? And that transparency, coupled with good technology that allows you to catch a lot of those things, right, is the key.
Yeah.
I think that's the recipe that we're sort of starting to work towards. And make everything visible, right? I'm truly a proponent, bring the leaders along, because then the faucet hopefully will remain at least a drip and will not completely close, because the more you educate them, the more you actually say, hey, come be part of the conversation, come learn, right? They will get ingrained with asking the right questions. And that transparency then allows you to be able to do other things in the future. So that's sort of how we're
that's great comments. And I think transparency is the key in getting those, line of business executive sponsors. So you've got good sponsorship in the organization, and you in fact become trusted as a CDO and are able to do that, get trusted information out. And I think, Kelly, like you said, skill sets and getting the right skill sets in place and leveraging what a lot of our partners could do, which is kind of what we do at IBM, because one of the things we're all struggling with is this is changing so rapidly. And there's the analogy, I think, Kelly, you came up with it. It's like there's a wildfire burning, right? And the wildfire is generative AI, and it's coming at us, right? And so we've got to be able to get to this, answer these questions, and I still didn't get an answer to my question from so if any of you have ideas or thoughts, because this is where the state of the art is right now, and this is where we are working very hard behind the scenes and on-site at clients to really put together a governance, classic governance, AI governance, and management of generative AI, and be able to create trusted environment with security, privacy, and how do we put that together into a unified framework? And right now, we're able to do it. We have a methodology to do it, but we're kind of carving each thing out of stone. And I'm spending a lot of time with the EDM Council and the EDM Council methodologies to really start baking that in so we can start getting industry standards around that. And all of you are completely invited to join that conversation in that discussion.
To be fair, Tim, you asked for magic sauce, so I don't.
There's no magic
I think we have ways to
But
get
as a
closer.
secret security guy, you should be able to give me magic.
But we both charge by the hour now, so it's not in our best interest to answer the question.
We can't afford your rate, so yeah, it's good. We'll call Kelly. She's got good rates. So with that, I want to open it up to the audience. We got like 15 minutes left here. And let you, if you can, introduce yourself, who you are, and then address your question to one of the panelists, and then we will, and then the rest of the panelists can chime in. All right, and someone with a microphone will come over. So go ahead.
Lori Fina, Personal Digital Spaces. And Tim, we actually do have a technology to track data through AI frameworks in real time, so we should talk.
Definitely, I want to talk with you, for sure.
And this one is actually for Kamal. Right now, we are at as you mentioned on the panel, a time where the data is extremely distributed and, to Chip's point, extremely hard to lock down. Especially with Toyota, your platform out there, the car, is generating more data than a cell phone, right?
Correct.
And everybody used to get worried about the data on a cell phone and how much more distributed can you be, with cars, and huge platform that's roaming around. So I'd love to hear about those challenges and your thoughts on both security, privacy, and data governance in this ever-expanding data universe.
Great question. So I've had the pleasure of working in many different industries, and I swear in every industry I've been, I was in healthcare, and I was like, oh my gosh, how much data do we have? Like, believe it or not, the telemetry that you capture every single time, you don't even think about it. So yes, there is a lot of data, right? And I think that's where our CISO, along with our sort of data game plan, along with making sure that security, privacy, compliance, all of us are really sitting down and having that very frank conversation, right? To say, we are not going to bring all the data home, right? That is impossible at the ecosystem and the scale that we have. We have to secure in place. We have to make sure that some of our assets, as you know, the telematics data is very critical, right? So how do we make sure that we are putting the right protections in place? That's the automation I talked about. To be able to say, we know what is happening to every bit of information, right? And how is it being used and for what? So those are some of the sort of conversations along with the solutions, right, that may already exist, but then how do you tighten down the hatches, I'll say, a little bit more, right, to be able to say wherever you can manage the blast radius, how do we manage that? Wherever there are holes and gaps, can be pen tested, how do you manage that? So there's no easy recipe, right? There are plenty of threat actors, and we are sitting down as a collective, right, to say, where do we see the holes and gaps? What do we want to invest in to close down? What needs to be a little bit more open? And number one, where is the data and the information located in the first place, right? Whether it's a catalog, whether it's other sort of tooling, I think that inventory, if you don't know where that is, right, I think you're going to have bigger problems. So I'm trying to round out our leadership to be thinking in those ways to say, I'm not saying centralize everything. What I am saying is you have to have the knowledge of where your information assets are, and then we can do something about it.
So I had an experience a couple days ago. I was out in Phoenix, Arizona, and I'm driving along in this self-driving car. It's got like all these antennas and everything, and there's nobody in the car, and it just comes and swoops in front of me, and and so then I decided I would try to zoom past it, and but it reacted very well. I mean, it was so. I mean, how does self-driving cars change all this?
Yeah.
I mean, it's going to be
I think it's
crazy
going
amount
to be amazing,
of data, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And certainly I can't speak to what we're doing in a lot more detail, but I think, again, the algorithms of how it is that we interpret the environment are becoming much more sophisticated. So how do you actually really think about, whether it's computer vision plus, right? To be able to say, I'm interpreting and creating a model of what's around. I'm reading all the telemetry of what's around. I'm giving you the next best action based on all of that telemetry. And now, here's how we're going to take the next step and the next step and the next step.
Yeah,
so
incredible.
That's what's
incredible
amazing and
problem.
exciting.
Yeah. All right, next question. Yeah, go ahead.
I have another question. This is Shravan Kasarla, CDO for Thriven. Great panel. So one thing I see, I know there is the beauty of today or what's happening over the last 10 years is really so much data is getting collected. I know, Kamal, you talked about how cars are becoming more intelligent, collecting a lot more. Yeah. We are collecting so we can use. Otherwise, there is no reason to collect, right? The question of this is, there is something that we are trying to gain out of this, either securing the vehicle or ensuring that nobody is taking it over, or predicting or preventive maintenance, all of these things in that case, and I know every industry has. How can we continue to make security to be like the way that cops do today? Cops are not stopping us from driving.
Right.
Vehicles can go anywhere. But
it's like the invisible security guy, right?
I think that's where my question is, how can we increase the discoverability, observability, but just monitor so that you're not there, because we are creating all of this so that there is a monetization can happen, there is more outcomes and impacts can happen. What are some additional ideas? I know we heard some and would love to know more about additional ideas about how we can make that to be security to be invisible while protecting it.
Yeah, good question.
I think Chip should answer that question.
I was going to offer that to the rest of the panel, but we'll go ahead. So the technology has come a long way, and honestly, I think back to the earlier point is the security industry's culture has changed. We used to be the pure house of no matter what you came to me. I ran North American security for a large global retailer, and whatever you came to me, my first answer was no. Now tell me why I should even ask for anything else out of you, right? I mean, why I should even try to learn more. We've done a much better job of that. The technology has come a long way. The ability for us to be able to manage the user behavior analytics. We're all the way to the point now to where I can give you frictionless access on your phone, and the tooling that we use is strong enough to be able to say, look, it's Chip because he's holding the phone in his left hand and authenticating with his left thumb. Hey, wait a minute, I'm not sure it's Chip because it's in his right hand and he's authenticating with his left index finger. That's how good the technology is today. So that's what we're striving for, because the better we get there, then the less the general population has to worry about how are we going to protect that data, because we're authenticating you. We're also integrating with platforms like Meta, AWS, et cetera, to really be able to say that, look, they're already authenticated there. So you're going to pass me that token along. Oh, I can answer this one question for way more than 10 minutes, man. So you can put that up there. But the reality is I can take that information from there, that token, and say, okay, that's a data point. I trust this person this much more than I did before. Now we're going to go ahead and work through whatever we're going to work through. So it's really about how do we make that more accessible. And as I'm mentoring CISOs, I really do try to get them to say, look, CDO, CEO, CIO, whatever new project you're there for, yes, we want to be able to make that happen. Here's our risk that we would have if we did that today, and here's the risk if you would give me some more tooling, right? And how I can mitigate each one of those. And so my goal would be to never tell my business sponsor no. It would be yes, but this is what we're going to need to be able to make that happen. Right.
All I heard is he was apologizing for the hell he made us go through from 10 years ago.
I have scars from creating all those problems.
We have PTSD from having to have those conversations.
You're correct. And I unfortunately I was there. You have a question in the back. Yes. Sorry. Did the panel want to add to that? My bad.
No.
Okay.
I think you
it's a
did
very
well.
good point.
Yeah.
We got time for one more question, I think. Yeah.
Hi, it's Anthony Scriffignano. I'm with
Hey,
you.
Anthony. Good to see you. Yeah.
Great to see you. I loved, I think this is a question for you, actually. If I were to summarize your comments earlier, it's about the data stupid, right? Right now, when I look at what's going on in the world, I see the amount of data doubling faster than we can measure how fast it's increasing. At the same time, AI regulation in particular, which is way more egregious than any of the data privacy regulation we've ever had. And at the same time, conversations like this about what's possible when we have all this data. It seems to me like if we zoom out, we've got an issue of there isn't one right answer here. There can never be one right answer here. At some level, it's like trying to regulate the propagation of hydrogen atoms in the atmosphere like we can.
Yeah.
And at the next level, and I think this is a data fabric, data mesh thing, it might be about regulating for intended purpose, for specific time,
Right.
with or without permission. So we get to a point where the data comes along with a package that knows about how it may be used and why it may be used. And then if an emergency happens or a law changes, we can change those permissions, or I can change those permissions. Is that where you see yourself?
Yeah, Anthony, great comments, because that's exactly where we're kind of heading with this, where how you connect classic governance, AI governance, all these things that we've been able to really work out, model management, now through generative AI, it's got to have a usage understanding, and so a usage package. And these are the rules, policies, and enforcement that needs to happen. And so I think that's the right track, because we've been able to do this successfully in several places. The problem comes in with how do you then force generative AI to do that, right? Because you can't really inject rules and policies into the brain, because then you affect how the generation of the AI is doing. And so the way we're looking at doing it now is injecting it into the corpuses of data that get ingested and consumed. And can we, if we control enough of that, get to effect of the output to be a trusted output? And that's the thing I'm looking for. And because we're carving each one out of stone right now, it's a labor-intensive, very specific for each enterprise of how we're doing it today. We need to get to a common methodology, that we have a natural process or natural method of doing this that we can get to. But I think that's part of the track. I think you're right on with that comment. Yeah, one more question, sure.
So Kamal, this is specifically for you. Heard some great insights into corporate culture on this panel and overall this morning. But on the topic of self-driving cars, I think there's a broader societal, cultural piece that I'm really curious about your and Toyota's perspective on. We have roughly 40,000 people die in automotive accidents in the US every year. And our society certainly doesn't have a tolerance to increase that number on a path to dramatically reducing that with autonomous vehicles in the future. At least to me, there's compelling data that says if we just reduce some of the drunk driving, some of the speeding, the human, really irresponsible judgment pieces, that we could materially compress those 40,000 deaths today. And most people's reaction is, why are we having a conversation about cars killing 10,000 people? Right? Or anyway, people are focused on the negative aspect, not the positive benefit. I think there's an analog to that in corporate culture, but I'm really curious about your and Toyota's perspective on that. Kind of, to me, what is kind of like a societal anomaly that's really blocking a lot of progress.
Yeah, great question. So I'll give you my perspective. I don't know that I can sort of give you the full Toyota perspective, right? Because there's lots of different schools of thought. So I think I'll build on the item that you said, which was, hey, drunk driving and so forth. I think a really fun thing that's happening, right, within our industry is, how do you actually do the prediction of when the person actually gets into the vehicle, and what is the telemetry that actually tells you whether you're fit to drive or not, right? So I think the position, right, of, hey, whether self-driving cars are going to change the world, what would that look like? The amount of risk that's involved with it, right? Tesla's gone and done many, many great things, which I think is fabulous. But I think if you look at the other OEMs, right, I think they're all griping with the risk part, right?
Yeah.
The litigation part, et cetera.
The lawyers are all drooling for
Yeah, and that's a hard thing to overcome, right, over time. So what sort of the shift, right, or additional data points are, how do you make sure that you build a more safe, secure way of how you create that environment, right? So in the case of the drunk driver that you said, in one of our sort of innovation sessions that was happening, we were like, hey, how would you actually go about sort of thinking through the telemetry and being able to say no without actually sort of the
Sounds like the secret security guy again, sitting
yeah,
in the car with you, right?
He has way too many more recipes than I do. But I think my point is this. I think that evolution will continuously happen, right? There's nothing that can stop that as long as there's demand for it, right? But what we want to be able to do is build better, safer, reliable cars, right? And those mechanisms, and then build the environment that I talked about, right? To feed into all that information to say, here's what's happening, so that even if it was a drunk person driving, that you'd be able to navigate that appropriately. And I'm happy to walk you through a couple of examples, right, to make that reality later on.
All right, we have exactly 1 minute for one more question if somebody wants to ask one. Go ahead.
Yes, Stéphane Gagnon from University of Quebec in Canada. A pleasure to be with you.
Yep.
Thank you. And Chip, for example, if the rest can have time, knowledge graphs and graph embeddings along with large language models, is that a feature that you explore at IBM or customers or partners to secure, of course, federated learning?
Yeah. I mean, graph in particular is very interesting to us because, part of the core, I think, of a lot of what we're doing is identity resolution and match processing. And we have some very sophisticated engines of doing that. And some of the things that we're doing behind the scenes is really, how do you embed that into generative AI so that you're actually doing identification? You're sorting out those types of things. So yeah, I mean, and the ability to look at things, visually through a graph database, see relationships, and then manage those relationships. That is absolutely an important aspect of what we're doing. And you can even see transforming what we've classically done with like MDM, what we've classically done with data quality tools, all of that really transforming into more of a generative AI function. That's kind of part of that whole. So yeah, it's absolutely where we're heading.
Yeah, graph is brilliant for anomaly detection, by the way. So hopefully Chip is drooling somewhere. And to be able to visualize and see those lack of correlations, I'll say, and those anomalies, it's actually amazing.
Exactly.
It's a challenging part of security right now. Is how do we secure that without the normal metadata that we would have with the regular database? So it's too long for the fact that we're getting the hook already. So yeah.
All right, I think we're out of time, and I want to thank the panel. A terrific discussion today, and definitely encourage everyone to network. We'll all be around afterwards.
Thank you very much.